3 years. That's how long Amani Brooks had existed in the spaces between soul and silence, visibility and void. She had arrived in Busan on a gray October morning with a sick 5-year-old, 2 suitcases, and 40,000 won to her name. No family. No connections. No safety net woven from the kind of generational stability she'd never known. Just her, Malik, and the suffocating weight of knowing that if she failed, there was no one coming to catch them. The apartment she found was in Nampodong, tucked above a nail salon that had closed permanently 6 months before she arrived. The landlord barely looked at her, just took her deposit in cash and handed over a key that stuck in the lock. The building smelled like decades of cooking oil and regret. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbors' entire lives, arguments about money, the canned laughter of variety shows, the rhythmic creaking of a marriage held together by routine. Her unit was a single room with a bathroom so small you had to stand sideways to use the sink. The window overlooked an alley where stray cats fought over garbage. The heating system rattled like it was threatening to explode but never quite delivered enough warmth. It was, by any objective measure, miserable. But it was hers. And more importantly, it was safe. Amani had learned early that safety wasn't about comfort. It was about predictability. About knowing which streets to avoid after dark. About understanding exactly how much money you needed to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator and medicine in the cabinet. She worked 3 jobs. Mornings, she cleaned at a hotel near Guangali Beach, scrubbing toilets tourists had used, changing sheets where strangers had slept, erasing all evidence of their presence so the next guest could pretend the room was brand new. The pay was minimum wage. The manager watched her like she might steal something. She never did. Afternoons were for Malik, picking him up from the subsidized daycare, preparing dinner with whatever was cheapest at the market, helping him practice his Korean characters even though her own pronunciation was terrible. His asthma had gotten worse since they'd arrived, triggered by Busan's humidity and the mold she couldn't quite scrub from the bathroom walls. The inhaler cost 45,000 won a month. She bought it before she bought food. Evenings, she worked at a pojamika, a street food tent near Jigalki Market. The owner was a woman in her 60s who'd lost her husband to debt and understood desperation in the intimate way only those who'd lived it could. She paid Amani under the table and let her take home unsold tteokbokki at the end of the night. Malik loved tteokbokki. But none of it was enough. Not for the rent that climbed every year. Not for the medicine. Not for the electric bill that spiked in winter when the heating barely worked but ran constantly anyway. Not for the future Amani was supposed to be building, the one where Malik went to a good school, where they lived somewhere without mold, where she didn't wake up at 4 a.m. calculating which bill she could delay another month. That's when she heard about the nightclub. It was the woman at the pojamika who mentioned it, carefully, the way you mention something dangerous but potentially useful. "There's a club on Houndy Street," she'd said, not quite meeting Amani's eyes. "They need someone to clean the VIP rooms. After closing. Cash work." Amani had understood immediately what she meant. The kind of establishment that operated in Busan's shadows. The kind where you didn't ask questions about the clientele or the stains on expensive upholstery. "How much?" she'd asked. "Enough that you wouldn't need the hotel job." Amani had started the following weekend. The club was called Mirage, neon letters in Korean and English above a black lacquered door. During operating hours, a line of beautiful people waited behind velvet ropes, music thumping through reinforced walls, luxury cars double-parked along the curb. Amani arrived after 3 a.m., when the last patrons had stumbled out and the music had gone silent. The manager who hired her was a compact man in his 50s with silver-shot hair and eyes that assessed her with clinical precision. His name was Mr. On. "You'll clean the private rooms on the 3rd floor," he'd said, handing her an access card and a supply cart. "Don't touch anything that isn't trash. Don't look in drawers or closets. Don't speak to anyone you see. If you find something concerning, you tell me. No one else. Understand?" She'd understood perfectly. The work itself was straightforward. wipe down surfaces, vacuum carpets, change linens, remove bottles and glasses, occasionally scrub something that looked suspiciously like blood from leather or marble. The rooms were obscenely luxurious, all black velvet and gold accents, bottles of champagne that cost more than her monthly rent, artwork she recognized from her single art history class in community college back in Chicago. This was a world designed for people who'd never worried about money, who'd never calculated whether they could afford medicine or food but not both, who existed in a completely different reality from hers. Amani cleaned it all without emotion. She'd learned to separate herself from her work, to turn off the part of her brain that compared her life to theirs. That way lay resentment, and resentment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She finished by 6 a.m., collected her cash from Mr. On, and disappeared into the early morning streets before Busan woke up. It was efficient. It was anonymous. It was exactly what she needed. For 6 months, it worked. She learned the club's rhythm, which nights were busiest, which rooms required the most attention, how to navigate the hallways without encountering anyone. She learned that the third floor was reserved for the highest-paying clientele, people whose faces she occasionally recognized from news reports or business magazines. She learned not to make eye contact, not to linger, not to exist beyond her function. And she learned about Kang Joon-hyuk. Not directly. The owner's name was never spoken on the floors where she worked. But she'd overheard it in whispered conversations between security guards. Seen it on documents accidentally left on desks. Understood from the way certain men moved through the space, with the confidence of people who knew exactly who protected them, that this place, this empire of neon and excess, belonged to someone powerful. Someone you didn't cross. Someone you didn't notice. Someone who noticed even less. She'd glimpsed him exactly twice. The first time, she'd been cleaning a mirror in the private hallway when he'd walked past behind her. Just a reflection, dark hair, sharp features, an expensive suit that fit like it had been born on him. He'd been talking quietly into a phone, his voice low and controlled. He hadn't glanced at the mirror. Hadn't registered her presence at all. The second time, she'd been wiping down a glass partition when his silhouette appeared on the other side, a shadow moving through frosted glass, flanked by 2 other shadows. They'd passed without slowing. Without acknowledging the cleaner on the other side of the barrier. Both times, Amani had felt her heart rate spike, not from attraction, but from the instinctive awareness of being near something dangerous. Like standing too close to the edge of a cliff or a predator's cage. She'd forced herself to breathe normally. To continue her work. To remain invisible. Because that was the game. That was survival. Men like Kang Joon-hyuk existed in a completely different world from hers. They didn't see people like her. She was furniture. Background. Functionally invisible. And that's exactly what kept her safe. Until it didn't. That Tuesday in November, Amani finished her shift 20 minutes late. There'd been some kind of incident in one of the VIP rooms, Mr. On hadn't explained, just handed her extra cleaning supplies and told her to be thorough. The carpet had required special attention. The walls needed wiping. Everything smelled like expensive cologne and copper. By the time she collected her payment and stepped outside, the street was quieter than usual. Most of the other establishments on Houndy had already closed. Security lights painted everything in amber and shadow. Rain had fallen earlier, the pavement still slick with it, reflecting neon signs in streaked colors. The air smelled like salt water from the ocean 6 blocks away and fried food from the late-night Pojamika still operating near the beach. Amani pulled her thin jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop. 6 blocks. She'd walked this route dozens of times. In 3 hours, she'd need to be up again to get Malik ready for daycare before her hotel shift. She was so tired her bones ached. The kind of tired that makes you stupid. Makes you stop paying attention to the spaces between streetlights. Makes you forget that you're a woman walking alone in a city that doesn't always care what happens to women like you. She had walked 4 blocks when she passed the alley. Narrow. Dark. Unremarkable. She'd passed it 100 times before without thought. But tonight, 2 figures detached from the shadows. Tonight, her anonymity, the thing that had protected her for 3 years, shattered. Tonight, Amani Brooks became visible. And in becoming visible, she caught the attention of a man who'd built an empire on making sure nothing in his territory went unnoticed. The moment their worlds collided would rewrite every rule both of them had lived by. The first man stepped into the light as Amani passed the alley's mouth. She registered him peripherally, dark jacket, hands in pockets, face partially shadowed, and made the calculation every woman makes on empty streets: keep walking, don't make eye contact, move with purpose. But then he spoke. Excuse me. His Korean carried a heavy accent she couldn't quite place. Eastern European, maybe. You dropped something. Amani's exhaustion made her stupid. Made her pause. Made her turn to look even though every survival instinct she'd honed over 3 years screamed at her to keep moving. I didn't. The second man materialized from the darkness behind her. Before she could scream, before she could run, hands clamped onto her arms with practiced efficiency. Her phone clattered to the wet pavement. The first man stepped closer, and in the amber glow of the streetlight, she saw his face properly: pale skin, shaved head, a snake tattoo crawling up his neck. Please, Amani managed. Take whatever you want. I don't have much, but... We don't want your money. His smile held no warmth. He reached out and fingered the collar of her jacket, pulling it aside to reveal the gray shirt beneath. The Mirage logo embroidered over her heart. His smile widened. You work for Kang Joon-hyuk. Terror crystallized in her chest, sharp and cold. I'm just a cleaner. I don't know anything. I don't see anything. I'm nobody. But you work in his club. The man glanced at his companion. Kozlov will appreciate this. A gift for the Korean. The first punch came without warning. His fist connected with her cheekbone, and the world exploded into white light. Pain detonated behind her eyes. Amani's legs buckled, but the hands holding her arms kept her upright. This is what happens, the man said, his face close enough that she could smell cigarettes and alcohol, when Kang thinks he owns the city. The second hit caught her ribs. Something cracked, she felt it more than heard it. Her scream emerged as a wheeze, airless and desperate. She tried to fight. Kicked at shins, twisted in their grip, bit down on the hand that came too close to her mouth. But there were 2 of them, and they were stronger, and her exhaustion had already hollowed her out before they'd even touched her. The third blow split her lip. Blood flooded her mouth, warm and metallic. Malik, she gasped. Not meaning to. Not wanting to give them anything. But his name came out anyway, a prayer, a plea, the only thing that mattered more than her own survival. They laughed. One of them grabbed her hair, yanked her head back hard enough to wrench her neck. She saw the fist coming toward her face but couldn't move fast enough to avoid it. The impact snapped her head sideways. Blood sprayed across her shirt, the same shirt they'd targeted, the one that marked her as property of a world she'd never belonged to. Tell Kang, the first man said, breathing hard now, that Houndy Street isn't his anymore. The final kick caught her in the stomach. Air exploded from her lungs. They released her arms, and she collapsed onto the wet pavement, gasping like a fish drowning in air. Through the haze of pain, she heard their footsteps retreating. Heard car doors slam. Heard an engine purr to life and fade into the distance. Amani lay there, cheek pressed against concrete that smelled like rain and garbage and the copper penny scent of her own blood. Her ribs screamed with every attempted breath. Her face felt wrong, swollen, misshapen, not entirely her own anymore. She needed to move. Needed to get up. Needed to get home to Malik. But her body wouldn't cooperate. The neon signs above blurred into streaks of color. Red. Blue. Pink. They reflected in the puddles around her, mixing with the dark spreading stain beneath her cheek. Somewhere distant, a car horn blared. Music thumped from a building several blocks away. The city continued its late-night rhythm, indifferent to her collapse. She thought of Malik sleeping in their apartment. Wondered who would get him ready for daycare if she didn't come home. Wondered how long it would take before anyone noticed she was missing. Her vision tunneled. The colors dimmed. The last thing she registered before darkness swallowed her completely was the sound of approaching footsteps, different from before, heavier, more purposeful, and a voice cutting through the haze. "Boss. Boss, you need to see this." Then nothing. Just the cold pavement and the neon bleeding into black. Consciousness returned in fragments. First, warmth, shocking after the cold pavement, radiating through her battered body like she'd been pulled from ice into fire. Then movement. She was rising. Being lifted. Arms beneath her back and legs, cradling her weight with a steadiness that suggested strength held carefully in check. Her head lolled against something solid, a chest, rising and falling in harsh, controlled breaths. Rain. She felt it on her face now, mixing with the blood, washing some of it away but not enough. The drops were cold, but the body holding her burned hot, like he'd been running or fighting or both. Amani forced her swollen eyes open. The world swam into blurred focus. Street lights. Neon signs bleeding color into darkness. And above her, blocking out the sky, a face she'd only ever seen as shadow. Kang Joon-hyuk. His features were sharper than she'd imagined. High cheekbones. A jaw that could have been carved from stone. Black hair plastered to his forehead by rain. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, dark, burning with something that looked less like anger and more like fury barely leashed. His expensive suit jacket hung open, torn at the shoulder. His white shirt was ripped at the collar, revealing the intricate tattoos that sprawled across his collarbone and disappeared beneath the fabric, dragons and chrysanthemums rendered in black ink that seemed to move in the flickering light. He was shaking. Not from cold. Not from exertion. From rage so absolute it made his whole body tremble with the effort of containing it. "Who the fuck hit you?" His voice came out raw, breaking at the edges. Not the controlled tone of a man used to command. Something more primal. More dangerous. Amani tried to speak. Her split lip wouldn't cooperate. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth. The word emerged as barely a whisper. "I just clean. Nobody. I'm nobody." "Who?" The single word exploded from him with such force that the men surrounding them, and there were several, she realized dimly, shadows in expensive suits standing back at a respectful distance, flinched visibly. One of them stepped forward, young, nervous. "Boss, we should get her too." Joon-hyuk didn't turn. Didn't acknowledge the speaker. His eyes stayed locked on Amani's face, cataloging every injury with the precision of someone taking inventory of violations. "Find them," he said, quiet now, which was somehow more terrifying than the shout. "I want names. I want locations. I want them before sunrise." "Yes, boss." The footsteps retreated rapidly. Joon-hyuk's jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jump beneath his skin. He shifted his grip, pulling her closer, not possessively, but with the careful intensity of someone handling something precious that had been damaged. His forehead dropped to touch hers. She felt his breath against her face, harsh and uneven. "You were attacked on my street," he said, each word deliberate, weighted with meaning she was too disoriented to fully process. "In my territory." His voice dropped lower, into something that made the remaining men shift uncomfortably. "That means this is on me." Amani tried to shake her head and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her skull. I don't understand." "You work in my club." His eyes bored into hers. "You walk my streets. That makes you mine to protect." The possessive pronoun should have terrified her. Should have triggered every survival instinct she'd developed over 3 years of staying invisible. But the way he said it, like a failure he was claiming, like a responsibility he'd already accepted, didn't sound like ownership. It sounded like obligation. Like penance. "My son," she managed, the only thing that mattered breaking through the haze. "Malik. He's alone. Already handled." Joon-hyuk straightened slightly, still holding her as if she weighed nothing at all. "My people are at your apartment. He's safe. He won't wake up alone." The relief that flooded through her was almost worse than the pain. She felt herself start to shake, delayed shock finally crashing through the adrenaline. "Easy." His voice gentled fractionally. "I've got you." One of the remaining men approached cautiously. "Boss, the car is." "No hospitals." Joon-hyuk's tone allowed no argument. "Take her to the house. Call Dr. Min, tell him to bring everything." He started walking, carrying her as easily as he might carry a child, his stride long and purposeful. The men fell into formation around them, protection, she realized. A wall of bodies between her and any further threat. She should have been afraid. Should have been calculating escape routes, planning how to disappear the moment she could stand on her own. But exhaustion and pain and the shocking warmth of being held by someone strong enough to bear her weight pulled her under like a tide. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her again was his voice, low and absolute. "No one touches her again." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a promise. It was a declaration of war. The room smelled like antiseptic and expensive wood polish. Amani surfaced slowly, consciousness dragging her up through layers of chemical fog. Pain registered first, a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from her ribs with every breath. Then light, too bright even through closed eyelids. She forced her eyes open. White ceiling. Crown molding. A chandelier that probably cost more than a year of her rent. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd ever slept on, sheets with a thread count she couldn't begin to guess. This wasn't a hospital. Memory crashed back. The alley. The fists. The voice asking who hit her. Amani tried to sit up and immediately gasped as her ribs screamed in protest. "Don't." The voice came from her left. Low. Familiar now. She turned her head carefully. Kang Joon-hyuk sat in a leather armchair beside the bed, still wearing the torn shirt from earlier, though someone had draped his suit jacket over the chair's back. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped, posture suggesting he'd been sitting exactly like that for hours. His eyes were bloodshot. His jaw dark with stubble. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Dr. Min set 3 broken ribs," he said without preamble. 17 stitches in your lip and eyebrow. Severe bruising. Possible concussion, though you'll need to stay awake for observation." Amani stared at him, trying to reconcile this exhausted man with the fury she'd witnessed on the street. "Where?" "My home. Private medical suite." He gestured vaguely at the monitoring equipment she now noticed beside the bed. "Dr. Min is discreet. I can't afford." "You're not paying." His tone allowed no argument. Panic clawed through the medication haze. "My son. Malik, he's alone, he'll wake up and I'm not there." "He's not alone." Joon-hyuk leaned forward slightly. 2 of my people are at your apartment. A woman named Jin-ae is sleeping on your couch. Former teacher. Good with children. Malik won't be frightened." The specificity of it, the thought he'd put into making sure her 5-year-old wouldn't wake up to strangers, did something strange to her chest. "You can't just." She started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. "Can't what?" His eyes never left her face. "Send protection to a woman who was beaten on my street? Make sure her child is safe while she recovers? I'm just a cleaner. You work for me. That makes you my responsibility." Amani shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as the room tilted. "I don't work for you. I clean your club." "It's not the same thing." "It is exactly the same thing." He stood, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the pre-dawn light. Anyone who operates in my territory, who earns money in my establishments, falls under my protection. That's the code. What code? He turned to face her. The one that says if you're attacked on my street, it's my failure. If you're hurt because of my name, it's my responsibility to answer for it. They weren't after me, Amani said quietly. They saw the logo. They wanted to send you a message. I know. His jaw tightened. Which makes it worse. She watched him, this man whose name made people cross streets, trying to understand what was happening. Why do you care? The question seemed to surprise him. He was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away but somehow couldn't. Because no one else will, he said finally. Because women like you, working 3 jobs, raising a child alone, surviving in the margins, you're invisible to this city. No one protects you. No one avenges you. He moved closer to the bed, and she saw something in his eyes that wasn't pity. It was darker. More personal. But you're visible to me now. I don't want to be visible, Amani whispered. I want to be left alone. Too late. Not cruel. Just factual. The moment they targeted you because of me, you became part of this world whether you wanted to be or not. So what happens now? Now? Joon-hyuk's expression hardened. Now I make sure everyone in Busan understands what happens when someone touches what's mine. I'm not yours. He met her eyes steadily. You are now. The words should have terrified her. Should have sent her scrambling for the door despite her broken ribs and the medication in her system. But looking at him, at the exhaustion in his posture, the blood still staining his shirt cuffs, the careful way he'd positioned himself close enough to monitor but far enough to not crowd her, she realized something that made her stomach drop. He wasn't claiming ownership. He was accepting responsibility. And in his world, that was far more binding. The door opened quietly. A woman in her 50s entered, professional, carrying a tray. Mr. Kang. You should eat something. Later. He didn't look away from Amani. The woman sighed. You've been awake for 36 hours. Later, he repeated, firmer now. The woman left, shaking her head. Amani watched this exchange, understanding crystallizing with cold clarity. She was safe. Safer than she'd been in 3 years. But safety, she was learning, came with its own kind of cage. And the man who'd built that cage had just locked the door behind her, not with malice, but with the absolute certainty of someone who never questioned his own authority. The question was, would he ever let her out? By morning, 2 men had vanished from Busan's waterfront. By afternoon, whispers spread through the underground like smoke through cracks. Kozlov's crew, the Russian syndicate that had been pushing into Houndy territory for months, had lost 3 enforcers overnight. Simply gone. No bodies. No explanations. Just empty apartments and cars abandoned near the docks. By evening, 2 rival crews had quietly dissolved their operations in the district, their leaders leaving the city with whatever they could carry. Everyone in Busan's criminal ecosystem understood the message. Kang Joon-hyuk had responded. They expected more blood. Expected public displays. Expected the kind of brutal retaliation that cemented power and warned future challengers. What they got instead shocked them more than violence ever could. On the 3rd day after the attack, Kang Joon-hyuk called a meeting in the private room on Mirage's 4th floor, the one reserved for business that needed to stay off record. 15 men arrived, lieutenants and crew leaders who controlled different pieces of his empire. They expected orders for war. The club is closing, Joon-hyuk said without preamble. Indefinitely. Silence crashed through the room. Mr. An, who'd managed Mirage for a decade, recovered first. Boss, we can increase security, vet the cleaning staff more carefully. It's not about security. Joon-hyuk's voice was quiet, absolute. It's about what the club represents. What I allowed it to become. He stood at the head of the table, still wearing the same controlled expression they all knew, but something had shifted in his posture. Something fundamental. A woman who cleaned our floors was beaten 4 blocks from here. Targeted because she worked for me. Because my name was on her shirt. He met each man's eyes in turn. That means I failed to protect what was mine to protect. The men responsible are gone, someone ventured. The message has been sent. The message I'm sending, Joon-hyuk interrupted, is different than what you think. He placed both hands flat on the table. New rule. Effective immediately. Any woman working in our establishments, cleaners, servers, anyone, gets security to and from their shifts. No one walks alone. No exceptions. The men exchanged glances. Boss, another lieutenant said carefully, that's a lot of resources for. For what? Joon-hyuk's eyes went cold. For the people who keep our businesses running? The ones invisible enough that we forgot they existed until someone used them to send me a message? No one spoke. Anyone who violates this rule answers directly to me. He straightened. And anyone who questions why this matters can leave now. No one moved. Meeting's over. The men filed out in subdued silence, trading looks that ranged from confused to calculating. By nightfall, the story would spread through every network in the city. Kang Joon-hyuk had shut down his most profitable operation. Not as punishment. As statement. 3 days later, Amani's ribs had healed enough to breathe without wincing. The stitches in her lip itched. The bruises on her face had faded from purple to sickly yellow-green. She was sitting by the window in the guest room, because that's what it was, she'd learned, one of 6 in Joon-hyuk's private residence, when he knocked and entered. He'd showered recently. Changed into a fresh shirt. Looked almost human again instead of the exhausted ghost he'd been that first night. We need to talk, he said. Amani set down the book she'd been pretending to read. About? Your future. He remained standing, maintaining distance. You have 2 options. She waited. First option, you leave. I'll clear your debts, all of them. Hospital bills, whatever you owe on your apartment, everything. I'll arrange housing somewhere safe. Different city if you want. New identity if necessary. You never see me again. Never work for me again. Clean break. Amani's breath caught. The debts alone would take her 40 years to clear. He was offering freedom. Complete freedom. What's the second option? You stay. His expression remained neutral. You work for me, not cleaning, something else we'll figure out. Fair pay. Actual benefits. Security. Protection for you and Malik. And the cost? Visibility. He met her eyes. You stay visible in my world. Which means you're a target if someone wants to get to me. You'll have protection, but the danger doesn't disappear. She studied him, this man who'd rewritten his own rules because of what happened to her. Why offer me the choice at all? Because you didn't ask for any of this. His voice softened fractionally. You were just trying to survive. You shouldn't be trapped in my world because of my failure. Amani looked out the window at the city spread below. Lights beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. Somewhere out there, in a cramped apartment in Nampodong, her son was probably playing with the toys Joon-hyuk's people had bought him. Safe. Federal cared for. She thought about 3 years of invisibility. Of exhaustion so deep it lived in her bones. Of choosing between medicine and food, between rent and daycare, between survival and actually living. She thought about the moment those men targeted her, not for anything she'd done, but for being associated with power she'd never even touched. And she thought about the man who'd carried her through rain-soaked streets, who'd stayed awake for 36 hours to make sure she was safe, who'd shut down his own empire because he'd failed to protect someone he considered his responsibility. The men who attacked me, she said quietly. Where are they? Joon-hyuk's expression didn't change. Gone. Dead? Does it matter? She considered this. No. Then she turned from the window to face him fully. I stay. Something flickered in his eyes, not triumph, but something closer to respect. You're sure? I'm sure. She lifted her chin. But not because I'm afraid. Not because I owe you. I stay because for the first time in 3 years, someone saw me. Really saw me. And I'm tired of being invisible. Joon-hyuk nodded once, slowly, as if she'd just said something that changed the fundamental calculation between them. Then welcome, he said quietly, to visibility. What neither of them knew yet was that visibility worked both ways. What neither of them knew yet was that visibility worked both ways. And Amani Brooks was about to show Busan's most feared man exactly what he'd been too powerful to see. The first time Joon-hyuk found Amani out of bed against Dr. Min's orders, she was in the kitchen at 6 a.m. making breakfast. She moved carefully, one hand pressed to her still healing ribs, reaching for a pan with the kind of stubborn determination he recognized from his own mirror. You should be resting, he said from the doorway. She didn't startle. Just glanced over her shoulder. I've been resting for 4 days. Malik needs routine. Normal food. Not whatever your chef keeps sending up. My chef trained in Paris. Your chef doesn't know that Malik only eats eggs if they're scrambled with cheese. Not fried. Not poached. She cracked an egg one-handed. And definitely not whatever that green thing was yesterday. Joon-hyuk watched her work, efficient, economical movements, no wasted effort. The kind of efficiency that came from years of making every second count. I could have someone. I know. She looked at him then, direct and unafraid. But this is what I can do. What I need to do. So unless you're going to physically stop me, I'm making my son breakfast. He should have. Dr. Min had been clear about bed rest. But something in the set of her shoulders, the quiet defiance in her voice, made him nod instead. I'll get the cheese. They worked in silence, him retrieving ingredients, her cooking with practiced ease. When Malik appeared 30 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he climbed into Amani's lap without hesitation, burying his face in her neck. Joon-hyuk watched mother and son together, the way she checked his breathing, felt his forehead, adjusted the inhaler on the table within easy reach. The kind of hypervigilance he understood intimately, though he'd learned it for different reasons. Mr. Kang? Malik's voice was small, accented Korean mixed with English. Just Joon-hyuk. Jin-ae says you saved my mom. Amani tensed. Joon-hyuk kept his voice neutral. Your mom is very strong. She saved herself. Then why was she hurt? The question landed like a stone in still water. Amani started to speak, but Joon-hyuk answered first. Because bad people wanted to send me a message. They hurt her to get to me. That was wrong. And I'm making sure it never happens again. Malik considered this with the seriousness of children who'd learned too early that the world wasn't safe. Are you a bad person too? Malik, Amani began. Sometimes, Joon-hyuk said honestly. But I'm trying to be better. That afternoon, while Malik napped, Amani found Joon-hyuk in his office, a space of dark wood and leather that smelled like expensive whiskey and old paper. Thank you, she said without preamble. For not lying to him. Joon-hyuk looked up from the documents he'd been reviewing. Children deserve honesty. They know when adults are lying anyway. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Can I ask you something? Why me? She gestured at herself, still bruised, still healing, standing in borrowed clothes in a mansion she'd only ever cleaned. You have hundreds of people working for you. Why did this one matter? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with that intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. You want the political answer or the truth? The truth. Because you reminded me of someone. He set down his pen. My mother worked 3 jobs too. Cleaned hotels, waited tables, took whatever cash work she could find. My father was gone. She did everything alone. Amani waited. One night, she was attacked walking home. No one helped. No one cared. She was just another invisible woman in a city full of them. His jaw tightened. She survived, but something in her broke that night. The fear never left. I'm sorry. Don't be. His eyes refocused on her. Be angry. Because she shouldn't have been invisible. You shouldn't have been invisible. None of the people keeping this city running should be invisible to the ones with power to protect them. Is that what you're doing now? Protecting invisible people? I'm correcting a failure. He stood, moving to the window. I built an empire on fear and control. Made sure everyone knew my name. But I forgot that real power isn't making people afraid of you. It's making sure the people who need protection actually have it. Amani moved closer, studying his profile against the afternoon light. Your men don't understand that. They will. Or they'll work for someone else. You're changing the rules because of me. I'm changing the rules because they were wrong. He turned to face her. You just made me see it. The air between them shifted, not into romance, but into something equally dangerous. Mutual recognition. Respect that ran deeper than attraction. I'm not your redemption, Amani said quietly. I can't fix whatever you think is broken. I know. His voice matched hers. But you can show me what I've been too powerful to see. That's more valuable than fixing anything. That night, after Malik was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Joon-hyuk sat alone in his office with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink. For 20 years, he'd built walls. Made himself untouchable. Turned off the parts of himself that felt too much because feelings were weaknesses in his world. But watching Amani refuse pity, demand agency, protect her son with the same fierce determination he used to protect his territory, something had cracked in those walls. She wasn't soft. Wasn't asking him to be gentle. She was simply being strong in a way he'd forgotten existed, the kind of strength that came from surviving without power, from protecting others when you had nothing left to give. And that strength, he realized, was more dangerous than any weapon he'd ever carried. Because it made him want to be better. Not for redemption. Not for forgiveness. But because she saw him, really saw him, and chose to stay anyway. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Mr. On's contact. New priority. I want a full audit of every woman working in our establishments. Wages, conditions, safety protocols. I want to know who's walking home alone. Who's working off books. Who's one emergency away from drowning. The response came quickly, boss, that's a lot of resources for. Joon-hyuk deleted the message without reading the rest. He knew what his men thought. That this was temporary. That he'd revert once the guilt faded. They didn't understand yet. Protection wasn't temporary. And the woman sleeping 2 floors above him, the one who'd looked at his worst self and still chose invisibility, had shown him something he couldn't unsee. There was no going back from that. No reversing what he'd become the moment he'd asked, "Who the fuck hit you?" The question had been about her. But the answer, he was beginning to realize, had changed him irrevocably. The first retaliation came 9 days after the attack. A bomb in a vehicle outside one of Joon-hyuk's distribution warehouses. No casualties, the night crew had already left, but the message was clear. Kozlov's remaining lieutenants weren't backing down. They were escalating. Amani heard about it from Jin-ae, who tried to hide the news but couldn't stop the armed men suddenly tripling around the residence. The second attempt came 3 days later. A drive-by on one of Joon-hyuk's restaurants in broad daylight. 2 civilians wounded, neither critically, but enough to draw police attention and media coverage. By the 3rd week, 5 different incidents had rippled through Busan's underworld, attacks that felt increasingly desperate, increasingly reckless. And each time, Joon-hyuk disappeared for hours into the night and returned with blood on his knuckles. He thought no one noticed. Amani noticed. She was in the library, Because Joon-hyuk's house had a library with more books than she'd seen outside a university, when she heard the front door open at 4 a.m. Heavy footsteps. Water running in the downstairs bathroom. She found him 20 minutes later, sitting in the kitchen with his shirt discarded, washing blood from his hands in the sink. Not his blood, she realized. The only marks on him were scraped knuckles and what looked like bruising along his ribs. He looked up when she entered, something flickering across his face, not guilt, but something close to it. Like he'd been caught doing something he'd wanted to keep hidden. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." She moved closer, taking in the damage with the same clinical assessment she used when checking Malik for injuries. "How bad is it?" "Handled." "That's not what I asked." Joon-hyuk dried his hands carefully, methodically. "Kozlov sent 6 men to the club where your friend from the Pojamika works. They were planning to burn it. Send another message." Amani's stomach dropped. "Mrs. Kim is fine. Everyone's fine." He reached for a clean towel. "The men who went there aren't." The past tense hung in the air between them. She should have been horrified. Should have been backing away from this man who spoke about violence as casually as discussing the weather. Instead, she asked, "How many does this make?" He looked at her then, really looked, like he was trying to understand what she was asking. "This week? Or total? Does it matter?" "Probably not." He leaned against the counter, exhaustion written in every line of his body. 15 detained. 7 hospitalized. 3 won't be coming back from where they went. Amani absorbed this. "And you were there. For all of it. I started this. I finish it." "You didn't start anything. They attacked me. Because of me." His voice hardened. "Because my name was on your shirt. Because you existed in my sphere. That makes it mine." She moved closer, close enough to see the purple shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw that suggested he'd been grinding his teeth. "You've been awake for 3 days. I've managed worse." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." He met her eyes. "They targeted people under my protection. My workers. My territory. If I don't respond, if I show any weakness, it doesn't stop. It gets worse. So you respond with more violence." "I respond with certainty." He straightened. "With proof that touching what's mine costs more than anyone wants to pay." "And what does that cost you?" The question seemed to surprise him. "What?" "Every time you go out there. Every time you hurt someone, even when they deserve it. Every time you make sure people fear you more than they fear consequences, what does that cost you?" Joon-hyuk stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "It doesn't matter what it costs me. It matters to me." Something in his expression cracked. "Not much. Just a hairline fracture in the control he wore like armor." "Why?" The word came out rougher than he'd probably intended. "Why would it matter to you what this costs me?" Amani thought about the man who'd carried her through rain-soaked streets. Who'd sat awake for 36 hours making sure she survived. Who'd shut down his empire because he failed to protect someone invisible. "Because you're not just the violence," she said quietly. "You're also the person who learned to make eggs the way Malik likes them. Who ordered children's books in English because you noticed he was struggling with Korean. Who changed every rule in your world because you thought they were wrong." She stepped closer, close enough to see his pupils dilate slightly. "And that person, the one hiding behind all this blood and certainty, matters. Even if no one's ever told you that before." Joon-hyuk's breath caught. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Almost human beneath the armor. "I'm not," he stopped. "Started again. I've done things that can't be undone. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Built everything on fear and control. You can't separate the violence from the rest. They're the same person." "I know." Amani held his gaze. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I'm asking if you're okay. The question landed like a physical blow. She could see it in the way he flinched, almost imperceptibly. In the way his hands gripped the counter edge like he needed something solid to hold on to. No one, he stopped. His voice, when he continued, was barely above a whisper. No one's ever asked me that. I'm asking now. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, finally, he answered with the kind of honesty that felt like watching armor crack. No. I'm not okay. The admission hung between them, raw, dangerous, true. And in the silence that followed, both of them understood something fundamental had shifted. She'd seen the violence. Seen the blood. Seen the cost he paid in sleepless nights and scraped knuckles and the weight that lived behind his eyes. And she'd asked anyway, "Are you okay?" Not because she was afraid. Because she cared. They stood in the kitchen as dawn broke over Busan, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Joon-hyuk hadn't moved from the counter. Amani hadn't stepped away. "You should go back to bed," he said finally, but there was no force behind it. Just exhaustion. "So should you." "I can't." He looked down at his hands, clean now, but the memory of blood still written in the scraped knuckles. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you in that alley. See what they did. What they could have done. I'm fine. This time." His eyes snapped to hers, and there it was, the fear he'd been carrying beneath all the violence and control. "But there will be others. As long as you're associated with me, as long as people know you matter, you're a target." "I know. Do you?" He pushed off the counter, the movement sharp with frustration. "Do you understand what that means?" "Not theoretically. Not as an abstract concept. But what it actually means when someone decides the best way to hurt me is through you." Amani held her ground. "I understand better than most. I was there, remember? I felt it. Then why stay?" The question erupted from him. "I gave you an out. Clean break. Safety. Why would you choose this?" "Because invisible safety isn't real safety." She stepped closer. "I spent 3 years being invisible, Joon-hyuk. Do you know what that's like? To exist in a city without anyone seeing you? To be so unimportant that when something happens to you, no one notices? That's not. They left me in the street like garbage." Her voice remained steady, but intensity burned beneath it. "And if you hadn't found me, if your driver hadn't been patrolling, I would have died there. Another invisible woman. Another statistic. Another person who didn't matter enough to protect." He opened his mouth. Closed it. "You asked why I stay," Amani continued. "I stay because being visible, being seen, being protected, being someone who matters enough that her safety becomes a priority, that's worth the risk. Even if it gets you killed?" "Even then." She held his gaze. "Because at least I'll die mattering to someone. That's more than I had before." The words hit him like a physical blow. She could see it in the way he flinched, in how his hands clenched at his sides. "You matter," he said, voice rough. "You mattered before I ever saw you. You mattered when you were working 3 jobs to keep your son breathing. You mattered when no one was protecting you. The world's failure to see that doesn't make it less true. Then why does it feel like you only started believing it after I was hurt?" The question hung between them, sharp, honest, cutting through to something neither of them had wanted to examine too closely. Joon-hyuk was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was blind. Powerful enough to control territory but too comfortable to see who was suffering in it." He met her eyes. "You didn't become valuable when I noticed you. You became my responsibility when I finally saw what I'd been ignoring. And now? Now I'm terrified." The admission came out raw. "Terrified that my protection isn't enough. That someone will get through. That I'll fail again and this time." He stopped. This time it won't be injuries you recover from. Amani reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away. He didn't. Her fingers brushed his wrist, not the scarred knuckles, but the pulse point just above. Steady. Strong. Human. I'm not asking you to stop being afraid, she said quietly. Fear means you care. But you can't let that fear turn protection into control. You can't cage me to keep me safe. Then what do you want? Partnership. The word felt solid. Right. Not protection like I'm something fragile. Not control like I'm something owned. Partnership like I'm someone who sees what you're building and wants to help build it better. His eyes searched hers. You want to be part of this world? I want to change what this world means. She didn't look away. You're already changing it, new rules, better conditions, actual protection for invisible people. But you're doing it from the top down. You need someone who knows what it's like from the bottom up. That's dangerous. Everything worth doing is. Joon-hyuk stared at her, and something in his expression shifted. The fear was still there. The protectiveness. But now, beneath it, something else, recognition. Respect. Trust. If we do this, he said slowly, if you step into this world as my partner, not my employee, not someone I'm protecting, but my actual partner, there's no going back. You'll be making decisions that affect lives. Seeing things you can't unsee. Becoming someone the city knows by name. I know. You'll be responsible. Not just for yourself, but for everyone we protect. Every choice you make will have consequences. I know. She squeezed his wrist gently. And I'm choosing it anyway. Not because I'm naive. Not because I think I can fix you or save you. But because I see what you're trying to build, and I believe it matters. For a moment, Joon-hyuk just looked at their hands, her fingers against his wrist, the connection between them suddenly feeling like more than comfort. Then he turned his hand over, palm up, and laced his fingers through hers. Partnership, he said quietly. Partnership, she confirmed. No promises of forever. No declarations of love. No surrender to passion. Just two people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stand together anyway. In the growing morning light, something between them crossed from protection into something infinitely more dangerous and more real. A bond built not on romance or fear, but on mutual recognition of what the other could be. What they could build together. The line they'd just crossed wasn't about desire. It was about trust. And neither of them could unsee what that meant. 6 months after the night Amani Brooks was attacked on Houndy Street, Busan's underworld had learned new rules. The club still operated. Money still flowed. Territory was still defended with the kind of certainty that kept challengers at bay. But something fundamental had shifted in how Kang Joon-hyuk's empire functioned. Women no longer walked home alone from his establishments. Every cleaner, server, and bartender had security, not shadowy protection, but actual people with names who checked in, who learned schedules, who treated the work with the same seriousness as guarding shipments or money. Wages increased. Contracts formalized. Healthcare offered. The invisible infrastructure that kept his businesses running became visible, valued, protected. His lieutenants had resisted at first. Called it weakness. Questioned the expense. Until the first crew that tested the new rules disappeared so thoroughly that rival syndicates stopped mentioning them altogether. Kang Joon-hyuk was still feared. But now, he was also something more dangerous, respected. Not just by the men who carried guns and collected debts, but by the women who cleaned floors and served drinks and existed in the margins. By the people who'd spent years being invisible suddenly discovering they mattered enough to protect. Word spread. Other establishments started following his model, not out of altruism, but because workers who felt safe were more loyal. Because businesses that protected their people attracted better employees. Because sometimes the right thing to do was also the smart thing. Busan was changing. Slowly. Imperfectly. But visibly. And at the center of that change stood two people who shouldn't have mattered to each other. Amani sat in what had become her office, a converted room on the third floor of Joon-hyuk's residence, reviewing the month's safety audits. She'd traded cleaning for coordination, invisibility for influence. Her job now was to see what Joon-hyuk's lieutenants couldn't, which workers needed support, which policies actually protected versus which just looked good on paper, where the system was failing the people it claimed to serve. She was good at it. Better than anyone expected. Malik appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over his shoulder, speaking Korean now with barely an accent. 7 years old. Healthy. Thriving in a private school Joon-hyuk had enrolled him in without asking, then backed down immediately when Amani had confronted him about overstepping. They'd learned to negotiate. To compromise. To be partners who didn't always agree but always talked through it. Mom, can Joon-hyuk come to my soccer game Saturday? Amani looked up. Did you ask him? He said to ask you first. She smiled. 6 months ago, a Mafia boss consulting her about her son's soccer schedule would have been absurd. Now it was just Tuesday. Tell him yes. If he can make it. Malik grinned and disappeared. Minutes later, Joon-hyuk appeared in the same doorway, leaning against the frame with the kind of casual ease he never showed anyone else. Soccer game Saturday? If you're free. I'll make myself free. He stepped inside, glancing at the papers spread across her desk. How bad is it? 3 establishments still aren't complying with the escort policy. And someone's been shorting wages at the Nampo location. His expression hardened. Names? Already compiled. She handed him a folder. But I want to talk to them first. Sometimes people just need to understand why the rules matter. And if talking doesn't work? Then you do what you do. She met his eyes. But let me try first. He nodded, taking the folder. You're better at this than I am. At talking to people like they're human? She raised an eyebrow. Yes. I am. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Partnership. Partnership. That night, after Malik was asleep and the house had gone quiet, they stood together on the terrace overlooking the city. Lights spread below them like scattered diamonds, neon signs and street lamps and the distant glow of the ocean. Somewhere down there, women were walking home safely. Children were sleeping without wondering if their mothers would return. People who'd been invisible were being seen. Do you ever think about that night? Amani asked quietly. Every day. Joon-hyuk didn't look at her. Wonder what would have happened if Marco had taken a different route. If someone else had found you. If no one had. I think about it too. She leaned against the railing. Not the violence. That's just what happened. I think about the moment after. When you asked who hit me. Why? Because you really wanted to know. She turned to face him. You weren't asking rhetorically. You weren't asking because you were supposed to. You asked because it mattered. Because I mattered. Joon-hyuk met her eyes, and in them she saw the same thing she'd seen that first night, recognition. Respect. Something neither of them had words for yet. You changed everything, he said simply. We changed everything. She corrected gently. Together. Below them, the city continued its endless rhythm. The same city where 3 years ago, Amani Brooks had been invisible. Where women like her disappeared into shadows and no one asked questions. But cities could change. People could change. Some men ruled with fear. Some ruled with blood. Kang Joon-hyuk had learned to rule with something more dangerous than either, the absolute certainty that came from choosing exactly who you protected, and meaning it with every breath. The night Amani was attacked should have been just another story of violence in a violent world. Instead, it became the night a question changed everything. Not what happened. But who it happened to. And whether anyone cared enough to ask. Joon-hyuk had asked. And in answering, both of them discovered that the most powerful thing in the world wasn't fear or control or even protection. It was being seen. Really seen. By someone who chose to see you anyway.